Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, in this final Jum'ah of the blessed month of Ramadan, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your dua, your supplication, especially for those who are in need of dua and supplications given their situation. And as we know that this month is already a blessed month, a month in which our du'as are accepted. And then on top of that, Friday is one of the most blessed days of the week. And on top of that, the last Friday of the month of Ramadan holds a very special place. And with that as well, a very special dua, inshallah, we will recite that dua as well at some point, maybe after our salat. But the dua to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his favor, his blessing, to bless us again with another month of Ramadan. And if we do not reach that next month of Ramadan, that whatever we have made our du'as, whatever our ibadah was in this blessed month, that it is accepted and that we are among the those individuals who are Allah has shed his mercy upon, not among those individuals who we have been mahroom, we have missed that blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That stated, I want to also continue to impart the adab, or that hikmah of Luqman that gives us our development, our training, our Islamic tarbiyah. A tarbiyah that, as we mentioned, it is for that latter stage of the training, when you're training your, you could say, children who are young adults, but also that training which it is also something that we need to remind ourselves of as well, constantly. Because when we look at that stage, as explained by Rasulullah and Imam Sadiq alayhi wasalam, that is what sets the foundation for the rest of your life. And among those wisdom that Luqman, he imparts upon his son, is adabul ma'ashira, something that we all need to understand, something that we see, and when we assess, and when I'll give these wisdoms that Luqman, these pearls of wisdom that Luqman gave to his son, when we assess the world, we see that unfortunately, the state of humanity is because they lack these simple adab, these simple traits. I'm speaking on a large scale. Yeah, you may find pockets of it, but because you're not observing that adabul ma'ashira. Ma'ashira means to live together. How do you live together with others? Whether those individuals may agree with what you think or they don't agree, how do you interact? And the lack of this is what creates the oppression, the injustice, all of the turmoil that we see today. So Luqman, he tells his son, he says, Bukun ya bunay, he says, Kun li ashabika muwafiqan illa fi ma'asiyatillahi azza wa jal. Of course, this is one that Imam Rida also, he imparted upon his companions. He says that those individuals who you associate with, he says, be agreeable with those individuals, except if being agreeable with them, you're leading down a path which you're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the point, that you don't be agreeable with that individual. And it doesn't mean that you are completely at odds with that person. You should be doing amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar. You should enjoin them to the right way. But don't agree with them in their actions, which is disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when we disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is where all of these turmoils go. And I'll just simply here make an indication. You can go back and when we read the Risalat al-Hukuk, the treatise of rights that Imam Sajjad alayhi wasalam, he dictates, and his companion writes down, Abu Hamza Thawali, the first right that must be observed is the right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the right of God. And if we observe that right as we should, then all the other rights will come into play, because we know that whatever we are interacting with in this world, whether it be the earth itself, that is Allah's creation. Even the smallest of creation, whether even it's an ant, or even those creatures which we know ourselves, we say, oh, well, these creatures are impure, but they're still a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even a dog, or whatever it may be. That they all have rights. Why? Because it's the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So imagine with other human beings, they're the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they agree with what you think or not. And if we don't observe that right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then this is when we fail also in observing the right of Allah's creation towards ourselves and our rights over them. Luqman, he then tells his son, he says, Ya bunay ibda il-nas bis-salam wal-musafaha qabla al-kalam. Simple way of interacting and engaging with people. He says, look, before you begin to talk with someone, to engage with them, maybe it's something that you need from them or something that you want from you or whatever. He says, start with the salam. Start by instilling in them that, look, my interaction with you is based upon what? As-salam, peace. Al-musafaha, musafaha also, again, a very simple gesture, but a gesture of being friendly. So this is what you start with. I'm not going to go into too much explanation. Many of these are self-explanatory. He tells his son also in regards to interacting and living with others, Ya bunay sahib mi'ah wala tu'adi wahidan. He says, take upon 100 friends, associates, people that you're interacting with. But as you do, don't become the enemy of any one of them. Don't become the enemy. Be kind to people. Be friendly with individuals. Ya bunay innama huwa khulaquka wa khuluquk. He says, because there are two things that you have in life. He says, your khalaq, which is your way of life, and then your khuluq, which is your temperament, your manners. He says, these are the two things you have in life. He says, فَخَلَاقُكَ دِينُك. He says, your way of life, he says, this is your deen. This is what you believe. This is what you believe, how you need to act and how you need to be as a human being. And then there's your khuluq. And what is your khuluq? He says, وَخُلُقَكَ بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And your khuluq, your temperament, your ethics, your ethos, this is what's between you and your interaction with others. So you may assume for yourself a way of life, whatever that way of life may be. But then from that way of life, from that deen, from that path that you've chosen, now you have to understand that what can I take from that to interact with people? That I can be cordial with people. And he says, فَلَا تَتَبَغَّضُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. He says, and in that interaction that you have with people, and this is something that should be established from your deen, your way of life. He says, when you interact with them, he says, do not be antagonistic with them. Do not be hateful towards them. وَتَعَلَّمْ مَحَاسِنَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. And learn the best of manners, the best of way in order to interact with others. Sometimes that takes really understanding the person that you're dealing with. Sometimes their temperament, understanding the best way. Well, if I interact with this person, I have to interact one way. Their temperament is a certain way. If I interact with another person, then I have to interact with them in a different manner. Why? Because their temperament is different. This is why he says, ta'allam mahasin al-akhlaq. Understand the best way of interacting with people. He tells his son, Ya bunay, kun abdan lil-akhyar, wa la tukun waladan lil-ashyar. Subhanallah. He says, my son, as you interact with people, and of course, you may interact with various people. He says, and those individuals you interact with who are akhyar, who are good-mannered, well-mannered people, righteous individuals, he says, be their servant. Be in their service. Because of course, when you're in their service, you also begin to pick up their mannerisms, the way they live, their ethos. And this is something that was even very clear during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can always tell those who spent the most time with Rasulullah. Why? Because their akhlaq, their mannerisms was also like Rasulullah. Same thing with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu, that you understood who, again, embodied that ethos of Ahlul Bayt. Just a very interesting story, and a paraphrase about the life of the Imam Ali. Once someone came and asked for Abu Dhar. He actually came and he was, someone came and asked Abu Dhar, had they seen Salman? Someone was looking for Salman. So Abu Dhar, again, Abu Dhar, he was known as Sadiq. He was someone who didn't lie. That the Prophet told him, he says, you will live by your tongue and you will die by your tongue. Because he would not hold anything back. Anything that was wrong, not just, he spoke out against it. After Rasulullah, he says, no, this is not what Rasulullah said. This is what he said. You should be doing this way, not that. So Abu Dhar, when he was asked one time, hey, have you seen Salman? And so Abu Dhar said, yes. He says, Salman is with Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, and they went this way. So the person started walking, and he noticed that he's like, there's only one set of tracks. He says, I know Abu Dhar, he's truthful. If he said that Salman is with Imam Ali, why are there only one set of footprints? So he kept walking, and then he saw that, look, there is Salman. Salman is walking behind Amir al-Mu'mineen. But as Salman is walking, he's looking at the footsteps of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he's walking inside the footsteps of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He came to Salman, he says, yeah, Salman? He says, what is this? Why are you walking this way? So Salman, he mentions, he says, look, he says, after Rasulullah, he says, the example that we must follow is Amir al-Mu'mineen. So I want to make sure that even in my steps, I'm taking the same steps that Amir al-Mu'mineen took. So this is why, again, the wisdom behind what Luqman is telling his son, he says, Ya bunay kun abdan li akhyar. Be in the service of those individuals who are righteous, who exemplify that akhlaq, the mannerisms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see. He says, be in their service. وَلَا تَكُنْ وَلَدًا لِلْأَشْيَارِ. And those individuals who are wicked, who are evil, who are disrespectful, those individuals who do not observe that characteristic and that trait that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see among his creation, he says, لا تكون ولدا. Don't be the child of that individual. In other words, as children, quite often, even subconsciously, we pick up the mannerisms of our parents. So if we are following in the footsteps of those who are heedless of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we will pick up the same characteristics, the same trait. The last pearl of wisdom that I would give from Luqman to his son, also very great advice that he gives to his son. He says, Ya bunay, la tukalib an-nas fayamqutuk. He says, oh my son, do not be contentious and antagonistic with people. He says, because then they will hate you. If you're always confrontational. That the first thing you do, even instead of even greeting a person, giving them a handshake, the first thing is something negative. Oh, how did you? Oh, just when you are in that, if that is your akhlaq, if that is your manners, so people will begin to hate you. No one would want to be around you because, oh, well, based on nothing, this person is going to start arguing. This person is going to start yelling, or this person is going to start. So people are like, oh, let me avoid this person. So he says, do not be in this way. وَلَا تَكُنْ مَهِينًا فَيُذِلُّوكَ. Nor be a person who is not discerning or judging. Another doesn't mean that you judge them, but being discerning about, again, your actions, what is right and what is wrong. So that you can, again, follow that first advice that Luqman gave to his son. He says, oh, my son, he says, don't be agreeable with your companions, except for if they're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to know what is right and what is wrong. So be someone who is discerning with regards to your actions, regards to what is your duty and responsibility before Allah. He says, otherwise you will put yourself in a situation where you are humiliating yourself. وَلَا تَكُنُوا حُلْوًا فَيَأْكُلُوكَ. He says, and don't be sweet, or you will be eaten, you will be devoured. And here, what it means by sweetness, and always just simply capitulating or just being so eager to please that you forgo what is actually what is right. He says, at that point, you will be destroyed, you will be devoured. وَلَا تَكُنْ مُرًّا فَيَلْفِظُوكَ. He says, nor be a person who is bitter, who's always bitter. Because again, if you eat something so bitter, what happens? Naturally, you want to spit it out. You want to get rid of it. It's like, oh, this is so bitter. So yeah, I can't palate this bitterness, so we spit it out. He says, nor be in that situation that you're so bitter that no one, again, wants to be with you. Pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues to guide us by these pearls of wisdom that we find in the Quran, in the words of Ahlul Bayt, in the words of Luqman al-Hakim, that we may exemplify the best of akhlaq, the best of manners, and also the best of interaction with others. Like we find our Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, wa akhir da'wana, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wa la asri inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqqi, wa tawasaw bis sabr. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين الرسول المصدد المصطفى الأمجد أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وأوصيائه وأولياء الله أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب والحسن بن علي والحسين بن علي وعلي بن حسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي. عجل الله تعالى فرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله. صدق الله علي العظيم. First and foremost, I advise myself for taqwa Allah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every action. I advise each of you for taqwa Allah, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every action. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "I'dilu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa." Be those who advocate for justice, because this is what is the closest thing to being conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conscious of your duty and your responsibility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the closest thing to taqwallah. And that duty and responsibility of advocating for justice stands out very greatly on this day, the last day or the last Friday of the blessed month of Ramadan, day which is designated as Yawm al-Quds, the day that we remember what is happening in Palestine. One of the examples that coincides with the words of wisdom of Luqman al-Hakim, that if we don't have that simple adab al-ma'ashirah, how to interact with people, how to live with people, then the result is that we will kill others, oppress others, that we will take others' property, their land, and even as we speak today, the land of Palestinians are being taken. Some of the governments have spoken out, Italy, Europe, they've spoken out that this should stop, because if it does not stop, there's no solution, no peaceful solution will ever arise out of that situation. People will not, in that region, will not learn to live in a way that, okay, hey, we think differently, we believe differently, we have different goals and objectives in life, but how can we make something that is workable? Even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you look at his life, there were people who were polytheists. There were treaties made with. There were people who were Christians, who were Jews. There were treaties made. There was a solution that was worked out. But when you don't have that simple adab, that ethos of living with others, cooperating with others, then it leads to a situation of injustice. And then that puts that responsibility and duty upon us to speak out against the injustice and advocate for justice. As I said, this is a situation that it was designated as the Dave Hutz, yes, among the believers, among the mu'mineen, and alhamdulillah, it is something that we have recognized that should be done. But it's something that even the world recognizes when we look at it. The world recognized the injustice that happened to George Floyd. People spoke out. The world recognized the injustice of the apartheid system in South Africa. People spoke out to bring about justice. Likewise, this is the same situation. That what is happening in Palestine. And I want to quote one of my favorite authors, who's a Palestinian himself, and not a Muslim, he's a Christian. Dr. Edward Rasheed, the late Dr. Edward Rasheed. Allah have mercy upon his soul. But he states, he says, remember the solidarity shown to Palestine, here and everywhere. And remember also that there is a cause to which many people have committed themselves, difficulties and terrible obstacles notwithstanding. And yes, it is a difficult task to stand in the face of injustice. It is a difficult task to speak out against injustice and advocate for justice. And this is what Dr. Edward Rasheed is mentioning with the cause of the Palestinians. He says, why? Because it is a just cause, a noble ideal, a moral quest for equality and human rights. That's why it's difficult, according to this quote of Edward Rasheed. Someone who, again, as a young boy, he was exiled with his family from Israel, what is called Israel. Born in Jerusalem, And eventually he went back, and I urge everyone to just look at this. Again, we have a program from 5:30 to about 6:15, Quds Day program. But once that is over, go to YouTube and look up Edward Rasheed's return to Israel, and it's called In Search of Palestine. If you go to YouTube, In Search of Palestine, BBC did the documentary. It's an eye-opener. He's going back, and he sees he's taking his grown son who's never seen Palestine. But look, this is our home. This is a home that I was born in this home, but now we can't live there. It is an eye-opener. So we must be those advocates of justice for the Palestinians, for anyone who is facing injustice. We must champion that cause. We must speak out against the injustice and not make our du'as, because we often make du'as for that, but Allah to bring about this justice. And one of the most repeated du'as is one of those du'as we recite in this blessed month of Ramadan. Allahumma adkhila ala ahli al-qubur as-surur. This is the way we begin. That Allah shed happiness upon those individuals who have passed on from this life and they're in the qabr. But then we begin to ask for justice and equality for those who are living as well. Allahumma aghni kulli faqir. Allah, give wealth to everyone who is poor. Why are people poor? Especially if we look at a lot of the causes now, that why is there poverty? Some people will be poor, some people were poor during the time of Rasulullah, but a great deal of the reason behind it is because of the inequality, the injustices. The Quran even speaks about it. The Quran tells the Prophet, those who are imbalancing the scales. Why are they making the scales imbalanced? In order to cheat others. The Quran speaks clearly about that your interactions, your business should be based upon justice, not injustice, not that you're cheating someone, not that you're trying to get over on someone. Because when that happens, yes, it creates poverty, utter poverty. So Allah, give wealth to those who are poor. Allahumma ashbi' kulli jaya. Those who are hungry, those who are famished. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is precise in His creation. I know some of the books that you may read, they said, there's not enough resources in the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not create the world and give life to the creatures in this world, whether they be mankind or other animals, unless He has provided sustenance for them. But because some are soaking up all of the resources and not giving it to others, or not even making sure that others at least have the basic resources that they need to live and to survive, yes, they will go home. Look at Yemen. Yemen is there is a huge crisis in Yemen. A famine, starvation. Why? There's not enough food in the world. How much food is actually wasted? Well, I'm not going to go to anywhere, just even here in America. Perhaps even in our own homes, God forbid. How much food do we waste? And so why are there others, human beings, the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, starving in other places? There's something terribly wrong. Allahumma ksu kulla uryan. Allah, give, again, basic clothing to those who don't have it. Again, many examples. Even in Palestine, people not having enough resources. Allahumma qdi dayna kulli madin. Allah, return the, suffice the loan of those who have taken loans. Allahumma farrij an kulli makrub. Allahumma farrij an kulli makrub. Allahumma farrij an kulli makrub. That Allah can relieve all of those individuals who are facing stress and who are distressed by things. And that distress could be living in encampments. Those individuals who from day to day, they don't know if they're going to survive. From day to day, they don't even know if their loved ones will survive. Again, when we are reciting these dua, they shouldn't be hollow. But, oh, well, we don't know what we were trying to say. Oh, yes, it's just a dua that we were reciting. What is the reference of that dua? Who are those who are makrub? Who are those who are in distress? Who are those who are in need? Who are those who don't have enough to eat? Who are those who don't even have the basic clothing that they need? Allahumma rudda kulla gharib. Allahumma rudda kulla gharib. Allahumma rudda kulla gharib. That Allah return every estranged person, someone who was expelled from their home, return them back to their home. Expelled because they could not live there in comfort. This is what Edward Rasheed, also Dr. Edward Rasheed, he also writes. He has a book of memoirs, Out of Place. And if you look at much of his writings, he writes about exile. Because he experienced it. And he says, yeah, it's one thing to think about it and to academically, to reflect upon it and analyze it. He says, it's another thing to experience it. He says, something that will forever leave a mark on you. To be exiled that way. Allahumma fukka kulla asir. Allah, free every person who is imprisoned. And this is not talking about those who have committed a crime, and the exact punishment is to imprison them, to detain them. Yes, that is in its place. But those who have been wrongfully imprisoned because of an injustice exacted upon them. Allahumma fukka kulla asir. Allahumma fukka kulla asir. Allahumma fukka kulla asir. And if we look at Palestine, Gaza, those who haven't been exiled, yes, they're living so-called in their homeland, but as prisoners. But every few feet, there's a checkpoint. Every few feet, there's a checkpoint. Not free to go back and forth. Because, again, I'll go back to the first word, the lack of IABA-Austin, lack of understanding that how do we live together as human beings? And as human beings, we often pride ourselves of being at the top of the chain of the animal kingdom. Because again, we are, when you look at the logical definition, we're rational animals, that we're at the top. Well, apes, they say, oh, it was close, but again, they haven't built cities and skyscrapers and jets and planes and no. But yet, we cannot master one of the most simplest thing, IABA-Austin, but how to live together, despite our differences of maybe ideology, of color, of religion. Something that we have to do a lot of work about. So Allahumma fukka kulla asir. And when you recite this, remember those who are imprisoned in their homes. And unfortunately, I will say this because it's part of a reality, part of our own history as well. The Native Americans, they're confined to a place. They're confined. And if you have ever spoken to them, they're not pleased about it. They're not happy. So how do we even resolve that basic issue of learning to live together as human beings? That's perhaps the most rational or intelligent being that walks the planet, as we like to consider ourselves. But the basic interactions that we have. Allahumma aslah, and this is something, of course, it says the Muslimin. Allahumma aslah kulla fasidin min umur al-Muslimin. Yes, of course, we have that responsibility and we have the duty, and we should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that anything first and foremost among ourselves that is not correct of Allah, correct that. Correct every wrong and every injustice that may stem from the Muslim. But this is a part of the dua that should go for every single person. And my interpretation of this would be that yes, first we ask Allah, start with ourselves. Because many people, oh, hey, we want to correct that person, or we want to correct this. First, you correct yourself and you be an example for others. So yes, Allahumma aslah kulla fasidin min umur al-Muslimin. That our house should be clean, our acts and our actions should be right and correct in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should be an example for others. Allah says in Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, kuntu khayra ummatin ukhrijat lin-nas. Best ummah that has been put forth for mankind. To enjoying what is right, to forbid what is wrong. Another interpretation of this in the Muslimin, because when we look at the hadith of Rasulullah and Ahlul Bayt alayhim afdalus salatu wassalam, and even in the Quran itself, there's a place where it says Muslim. It doesn't mean someone who simply has accepted the Rasala of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Means that anyone who submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anyone who has faith and believe in God, and that God has sent an example through his prophets to mankind, that if you are among those individuals, Allahumma aslih kulla umurin muslimin. Whatever level and degree that you submit to a divine being, that your actions, your way of life, your advocacy for justice and what is right, it should be, first and foremost, start with yourselves. And then spread that justice, spread that goodness, spread that humanity among others. And of course, with the rest of the dua, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Allahumma shfi kulli mareed, Allahumma sudda faqrana bighnak, Allahumma ghayra su'a halina bi husn halat. That, give cure to those who are ill, especially in this time of pandemic. Oh Allah, make us wealthy, give us from your wealth. Of course, the best wealth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wealth of understanding, not necessarily material wealth, wealth of spirit and heart. That Allah change the bad state that we are in to the best of states. Allahumma qdi anna ad-dayn wa aghnina min al-faqr innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. And Allah save us from the poverty, not only worldly poverty, but spiritual poverty, poverty of ignorance. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to answer this dua, and especially to lift all injustice that exists in the world today. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the repentance of Imam Zaman, so that he may establish justice in this world as it has been filled with injustice. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among his helpers, his companions, and those who sacrifice their lives for him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins and cover our shortcomings, to grant us our needs, to have mercy upon our deceased ones, and to cure those who are ill among our friends and family members. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم اغفر ذنوبنا واستر عيوبنا وقضي حوائجنا واشف مرضانا وارحم امواتنا وعجل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان واجعلنا من اعوانه وانصاره والمستشارين بين يديه وتحت لواء بحق محمد واله الطاهرين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على